Somebody asked me yesterday what I considered to be the most interesting mineral in the world. It's obviously a very difficult question to answer because people's criteria for what is considered to be interesting is going to differ from person to person. But the person was asking me, and I'm a history enthusiast, so I'm going to say lapis lazuli. And yes, for the naysayers, because there's always somebody that slides unlubricated into the comments that says that's not how you pronounce it. First of all, there's about 18 perfectly acceptable pronunciations for lapis lazuli. Two, lapis lazuli is generally considered to be the most appropriate way of pronouncing it. Three, it really does depend on your accent. I'd say the way that lapis is pronounced differs from place to place, largely anchored by the regional dialect or regional accent. So people get bent into shapes and sort of tie themselves up in knots over really silly things, and pronunciation tends to be one of them. If you want this vindicated, if you go to a pronunciation application, whether that be on any search engine, type in lapis lazuli into one of them and then type it into another one and then another one. They'll all come back saying different things. It's hilarious. So let's not tie ourselves up in knots too much over the pronunciation of lapis. Lapis lazuli, if you're unfamiliar, is a beautiful blue mineral, which comes as an extension of the fact that it's primarily comprised of lazurite and lazurite, calcite, pyrite, and sodalite to a lesser degree, or sodalite, depending on how you fancy pronouncing it. Now, lapis is perhaps famous amongst young people because of the game Minecraft. Whenever we do pop-up shops, for example, and sell lapis, one of the things that excites children more than any other mineral is lapis, and their frame of reference for that generally tends to be lapis. Now, one of the reasons as to why I find lapis generally very interesting is because it's very indelibly etched into folklore. It's very, very indelibly etched into the history of very important civilizations, which are profoundly important in the context of human society. Mesopotamia, which is the area between the Tigris and the Euphrates River, which would be modern-day Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Babylon, Samaria. We've got examples of it in South America. We've got examples of it, obviously, across Afghanistan, which makes sense because that's where the largest deposits are. If you look at the death shroud of Tutankhamun, which is obviously ancient Egypt, the blue inflections in the death shroud of Tutankhamun, which you should be familiar if you underwent any kind of secondary education or junior education. The lapis, that's all lapis lazuli in the death shroud of Tutankhamun. Or if you look at perhaps paintings from the early Italian Renaissance, most notably of paintings of the Virgin Mary, which were famously made with blue paints, which were made blue by the fact that they were crushing up lapis and using it as a pigment, which to a large extent still happens in various places around the world. Lapis is still used as a pigment in paint. Now, if you look at something like the Ishtar Gate, which I believe was recreated by Saddam Hussein, actually, it was the gates of Babylon, basically, which was largely comprised of blue lapis. I think there was a representation of it in that movie, The Immortals, not Immortals, The Eternals, the Marvel film, the terrible film by Marvel called Eternals. In that, there's a representation of the city of Babylon, and the gates in that film is the Ishtar Gate, as far as I can remember. And Saddam Hussein, which was perhaps one of the only culturally useful things that man ever did, he recreated the Ishtar Gate out of lapis lazuli, really beautiful, embroidered with gold and lapis, built out of lapis and embroidered with gold. Lapis is a profoundly interesting mineral by virtue of the fact it's one of the things that really points to ancient mercantilism being much more extensive than most people tend to give ancient societies credit for, bearing in mind that lapis lazuli has been mined since about 5,300 BCE. So we've been mining it for about 6,000 or 7,000 years, which is incredible. That's an incredible factoid in and of itself. So it points to the fact that systems of mercantilism were much more extensive and much more impressive than perhaps most people give it credit for. Lapis in various places around the world would have been traded before the onset of traditional money. It would have been used in the barter economy as currency, which I find to be quite interesting. It was very prevalent in ancient Egypt. It was traded throughout the Silk Road, which was that sort of system of trade routes throughout Central Asia, stretching and interconnecting China with the Mediterranean. It's used profoundly even today, it was considered to have healing properties in ancient Egypt. It was considered to have healing properties in Rome and Greece and various places throughout the Levant and the Fertile Crescent. It is mined in Chile even to this day, so it was very prevalent in South American civilizations as well. We see it a lot in sort of Aztec and Inca and Olmec and various different South American tribes. As even today, it's mined in Chile, but to a lesser degree. It's predominantly mined in Afghanistan, largely northeast Afghanistan, but not exclusively, in the areas near the Tajikistan border. And now it is traded through Pakistan, largely as an extension of the fact that Afghanistan, despite being a country that borders more than any other country in the world, there's loads of countries that border Afghanistan. But only a couple of those have coastlines of their own. So Pakistan is the obvious choice. So lapis generally tends to get trafficked, is perhaps the wrong word, though occasionally true, trafficked and traded through Pakistan, and then comes out through things like the ports of Karachi if it's entering the Western or the Eastern Hemisphere. So lapis is a remarkably interesting mineral. It's very indelibly etched into ancient folklore, ancient history, ancient artwork, literature. So yeah, in its own right, lapis I would consider to be the most interesting mineral in the world.